Okay, so medieval castles. We all picture them, right? Towering stone walls, maybe a dragon or two. Okay, maybe not dragons, but definitely something mysterious, something occult. And it's true, castles were more than just places where kings lived and knights practiced sword fighting. They were often believed to be centers of, well, weird stuff. But what actually went on behind those thick walls? That's what we're going to explore in this little journey. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do. Here, and let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Now, before we get into the nitty-gritty, we need to, clear the air a bit, because there are a lot of myths floating around. You know, whispers of secret societies, devil worship in the dungeons. Honestly, most of it's probably just stories. Good stories, sure, but still just stories. What we will be looking at are the real practices, the beliefs that actually influenced medieval castle life. We're talking about things like alchemy, astrology, and even folk magic. These weren't just parlor games. They were like serious attempts to understand the universe, and maybe even control it a little. Think about it. Medieval people didn't have the same scientific explanations that we do today. So when something weird happened, a sickness, a bad harvest, even just a string of bad luck, they turned to other explanations. Explanations that often involved magic, spirits, and hidden knowledge. And castles, well, they were perfect places for these kinds of practices to flourish. They were like private worlds, ruled by powerful people who had the resources and the authority to explore these unconventional ideas. Plus, castles were just dripping with symbolism. I mean, think about it. They were built to be strong, impenetrable. They were centers of power, both earthly and something else, asterisk. And let's be honest, the whole secret passage vibe totally adds to the whole mystery element, right? So yeah, we're not going to be chasing ghosts or searching for evidence of demon summoning. Although, okay, maybe we'll touch on that just a little bit. But we're mostly going to be focusing on the history, the real history, of occult practices in medieval castles. And why should you care? Well, for one thing, it's just fascinating stuff, but also understanding these beliefs can give us a whole new perspective on medieval society. It shows us how people thought, how they dealt with uncertainty, and how they tried to make sense of a world that was often scary and unpredictable. Think of it like this. Imagine you were the king or queen of a medieval castle. What would you do to protect your people, to secure your reign, to maybe even gain an advantage over your enemies? Would you trust science? Maybe. But would you also consult an astrologer? Maybe hire an alchemist to turn lead into gold? Well, a lot of rulers did. So get ready to step back in time and explore the hidden world of medieval castles. We'll be diving into some pretty strange stuff, but hopefully, by the end we'll have a better understanding of what really happened behind those imposing stone walls. We'll uncover the allure of hidden knowledge, the symbolic power of the castle itself, and how the pursuit of mystical understanding intertwined with the everyday lives of medieval rulers and their courts. It's a trip into the minds of people who were trying to unlock the secrets of the universe, one ancient ritual at a time. And most importantly, we'll see how these practices, even the ones that seem totally bizarre to us today, shaped the history and culture of the Middle Ages. Okay, let's do this. Let's get comfy and start peeling back the layers of mystery, one stone at a time. You know, figuratively. Don't go dismantling any castles. Okay, so when we talk about the occult in the Middle Ages, a lot of people immediately jump to witches, pointy hats, and maybe a bubbling cauldron, right? And sure, witchcraft was definitely a part of it, and the fear of it was very real. But honestly, it's just the tip of the iceberg. The medieval understanding of the occult was way more complex and fascinating than just good versus evil, witches versus the church, you know. Think of it like this. The word occult itself comes from the Latin word occultus, which basically means hidden or secret. So at its core, the occult in the Middle Ages referred to knowledge and practices that were hidden from the mainstream, not necessarily because they were evil, but often because they were, well, specialized. Now, what kind of specialized knowledge are we talking about? Well, imagine a world where the line between science, philosophy, and religion was super blurry. That's medieval Europe, and tucked away in monasteries, royal courts, and even just whispered in village corners, you'd find people delving into stuff like alchemy, trying to turn lead into gold, searching for the elixir of life. You know, the really interesting stuff. These weren't just about getting rich, though. Alchemy was deeply tied to philosophy and spirituality. Alchemists believed that transforming base metals into gold was a metaphor for the soul's journey towards enlightenment. It was about purifying yourself, understanding the secrets of the universe, and maybe, just maybe, getting really, really good at chemistry along the way. Then you have astrology. Now, we might think of astrology as those fun little horoscopes in the newspaper, but in the Middle Ages, it was a serious science, well, a pseudoscience, but still. Astrologers believed that the movements of the planets and stars directly influenced events on Earth, from the weather to someone's personality to the fate of kingdoms. Kings and nobles would often employ astrologers to advise them on important decisions, like when to launch a war, get married, or even just plant crops. Imagine relying on the alignment of Jupiter and Mars to decide when to harvest your turnips. Seems wild, right? But it was a serious part of medieval life. And it wasn't just about knowing what the stars said, but how to use that information. Talismanic magic was another big part of the medieval occult world. People believed that certain objects, especially those created under specific astrological conditions, could be imbued with special powers. Think of it like a cosmic battery. You'd carefully craft a talisman during a specific planetary alignment, chant certain incantations, and boom, you'd have an object that could bring you luck, protect you from harm, or even help you attract love. It's kind of like a supercharged good luck charm. So where did all this stuff come from? Well, a lot of it was inherited from ancient civilizations like Greece and Rome. The works of philosophers like Plato and Aristotle were hugely influential, but often interpreted through a more mystical lens. But also, a lot came from the Islamic world. During the Middle Ages, Islamic scholars were way ahead of Europe in fields like science, medicine, and mathematics. And they translated and preserved many ancient texts that had been lost in Europe. European scholars, hungry for knowledge, eagerly absorbed these ideas, including stuff like alchemy, astrology, and even magic. Think about it. Books like the Picatrix, an Arabic grimoire filled with astrological magic and talismanic rituals, were translated into Latin and became incredibly popular among European intellectuals. It's like a medieval bestseller, full of spells and weird ingredients. So yeah, the Islamic world played a huge role in shaping the medieval understanding of the occult. Now, it's important to remember that the church wasn't exactly thrilled with all this stuff. They saw some of it as potentially heretical, especially if it seemed to challenge God's authority or involve demonic forces. But honestly, the line between acceptable Christian practice and forbidden occultism was often fuzzy. For example, prayer was seen as a way to influence divine power, which in a way is kind of like magic, right? And the veneration of saints and relics was also pretty close to talismanic magic. So the church had to be careful about what it condemned, because, well, some of these things were awfully close to their own practices. And that's kind of what makes the medieval occult so fascinating. It wasn't just about good versus evil or belief versus disbelief. It was a complex web of ideas, practices, and beliefs that that blended science, religion, philosophy, and magic. It was about trying to understand the universe, control one's destiny, and maybe, just maybe, unlock the hidden secrets of reality. So next time you think about the occult in the Middle Ages, remember it's way more than just witches and cauldrons. It's about a whole world of hidden knowledge, esoteric rituals, and people trying to make sense of a world that was both beautiful and terrifying. Alright, settle in folks, because in this section we're not just talking about stone walls and arrow slits. We're diving into the medieval castle as more than just a fortress, okay? Think of it as a stage, a canvas, a really, really sturdy container for all sorts of secrets, and let's face it, weirdness. The castle, you see, wasn't just a military necessity, it was a symbol of power, of course, but also a symbol of order, of hierarchy, of the way the world should be, at least according to the guy living in it. These weren't just places to defend against invaders, they were statements, loud, imposing statements carved out of stone. The height of the towers, the thickness of the walls, the sheer scale of the thing, it all screamed, "I'm in charge here," and that, my friends, makes it the perfect backdrop for things that maybe shouldn't be happening. Consider the layout. Every castle had a keep, right? That's the central, strongest part, often the oldest too. That's where the lord and his family lived. It was the heart of the castle, both literally and figuratively. But think about what that meant in terms of access. Unless you were part of that inner circle, getting into the keep was, shall we say, difficult. So if you wanted to, I don't know, conduct a little alchemical experiment, or maybe consult the stars in private, the keep offered a level of security and discretion that you simply wouldn't find in the village. It was in essence a private sanctuary away from prying eyes. And then there were the less obvious spaces, the chapels for instance, ostensibly places of worship, and no doubt many were genuinely devout. But chapels, especially private chapels within the castle, could also be repurposed. Maybe a secret society used it for their own, shall we say, unique ceremonies. Maybe the Lord himself had some unconventional ideas about religion that he wanted to explore without the local bishop breathing down his neck. The sanctity of the space, paradoxically, made it a perfect hiding place for the profane. Dungeons naturally come to mind. Now, we usually think of dungeons as places of imprisonment and torture, and sadly, that's often true. But dungeons also offered secrecy, a place where things could be done, knowledge could be extracted, secrets could be learned, all without anyone else knowing. The very darkness and despair of the dungeon could be seen as conducive to certain types of ritual. After all, if you're trying to contact spirits, what better place to do it than a place soaked in the suffering of the living and the echoes of the dead? A bit morbid perhaps, but we're talking about the medieval period here. Morbidity was kind of their thing. But beyond the physical spaces, there's also the symbolism inherent in the castle itself. Think about the materials: stone, hard, unyielding, seemingly eternal. It represents permanence, stability, the enduring nature of power. But stone also comes from the earth, from the depths of the planet. So it also connects to something older, more primal. That connection to the earth, to the deep hidden places of the world, could be seen as well magical, especially if you were someone who believed that the earth itself was a living entity, imbued with unseen forces. Then there's the architecture itself, the circular shape of towers, the geometric patterns in the stonework. These weren't just random design choices. They were often deliberate attempts to incorporate sacred geometry, to align the castle with cosmic forces, to make it a place of power, not just through its defenses, but through its very design. Think about it. Architects in the medieval period weren't just builders. They were often scholars, mathematicians, and sometimes even, esoteric thinkers. They knew about the symbolism of numbers, the power of shapes, and they incorporated that knowledge into their creations, often in subtle, almost imperceptible ways. And finally, there's the atmosphere of the castle itself. The flickering torchlight, the echoing footsteps, the whispering wind, it all creates a sense of mystery, of otherworldliness. Especially at night, when the castle is shrouded in darkness, it's easy to imagine that anything is possible. The veil between worlds seems thinner, the spirits seem closer, and for those inclined towards the occult, that atmosphere is intoxicating. It's a stimulant for the imagination, a catalyst for belief. So when we talk about occult rituals in medieval castles, we're not just talking about people sneaking into dungeons to cast spells. We're talking about something far more complex. We're talking about the intersection of power, symbolism, architecture, and atmosphere. We're talking about spaces deliberately designed, or perhaps inadvertently shaped, to be conducive to the exploration of the unseen. The medieval castle, you see, wasn't just a fortress. It was a portal, in a way. A portal to other worlds, to other possibilities, to other ways of understanding reality. And that makes it the perfect setting for all sorts of secrets, mysteries, and yes, maybe even a little bit of magic. Alright, settle in folks, because we're about to wander into the slightly murky, definitely fascinating world of alchemy, right here in the heart of a medieval castle. Now, you might be picturing bubbling beakers and eccentric old wizards, and, well, you wouldn't be entirely wrong, but there's a lot more to it than just that, and it often tied directly into the lives and ambitions of the powerful. So alchemy and the royal chamber, transforming matter and seeking immortality in the castle's heart. Think of the castle not just as a fortress or a home, but also as a potential laboratory. Specifically, we're zoning in on the royal chamber, or perhaps a secluded tower room, somewhere private, somewhere secret. This wasn't just about playing with chemicals. This was about power, knowledge, and the ultimate goal, maybe a little bit out there, of immortality. Alchemy, back then, wasn't quite the science we understand today. It was a heady mix of philosophy, proto-chemistry, spirituality, and a deep-seated belief that all matter was connected and could be transformed. Alchemists believed that base metals, like lead, could be transmuted into gold. Now, beyond the obvious economic allure of that little trick, it was really about more than just gold. Transmuting metals was seen as a metaphor for transforming the self, purifying the soul, and achieving spiritual enlightenment. Deep stuff, right? And the royal chamber? Well, who better to dabble in these profound mysteries than the king or queen? They possessed the resources, the power, and arguably the biggest motivation to extend their reign indefinitely. Imagine the scene: flickering candlelight, strange symbols etched onto the walls, perhaps a personal library filled with arcane texts, and the air thick with the scent of exotic herbs and, well, probably something a little bit like sulfur. Royalty would often employ alchemists, either openly as advisors or more secretly, cloaked in the role of physician or court magician. These weren't just court jesters, folks. These were men, and sometimes women, with access to the most powerful people in the land, entrusted with potentially life-altering secrets. Think of it as having a top-tier scientist and a spiritual guru rolled into one, whispering in the ear of the king. So what were these alchemists actually doing? Well, practical alchemy involved a whole range of techniques. Distillation was key, using elaborate alembics and retorts to purify substances. Calcination involved heating materials to ash, seen as a process of reducing them to their essential components. They'd experiment with different combinations of minerals, acids, and plant extracts, meticulously recording their observations in coded language, partly to protect their secrets, but also because they believed the act of writing itself held magical power. One key concept was the philosopher's stone. This wasn't just some legendary object, it was the goal, the ultimate alchemical substance believed to be capable of transmuting base metals into gold and granting immortality. Recipes for creating the stone were often incredibly cryptic, full of symbolism and metaphor, making them almost impossible to decipher for the uninitiated. It's like a recipe where the ingredients are emotions and the oven is your soul. But even if the king didn't actually achieve immortality, the idea of alchemy offered a lot. It reinforced the idea of royal power. By associating themselves with these transformative processes, rulers could project an image of themselves as powerful agents of change, capable of controlling not just their kingdom, but even the fundamental building blocks of reality. Plus, there were some real tangible benefits. Alchemists developed new medicines, created dyes, and improved metalworking techniques. Gunpowder, that ultimate medieval power player, actually owes a lot to alchemical experimentation. So even if the king didn't get his hands on the elixir of life, he still got better weapons and maybe cured a few stomachaches in the process. Now, it's easy to dismiss alchemy as pseudoscience, and in many ways it was, but it's important to remember that these alchemists were pioneers, pushing the boundaries of knowledge at a time when the lines between science, magic, and religion were very, very blurry. Their experiments, though often based on flawed theories, laid the groundwork for modern chemistry and medicine, and the royal chamber, that secret space within the castle walls, became a crucible not just for chemical reactions, but for ideas, ambitions, and the enduring human quest to understand, and perhaps even control, the mysteries of life and death. So next time you see a medieval castle, remember it wasn't just about defense and power struggles. Sometimes it was also about trying to turn lead into gold and maybe, just maybe, cheat death itself, all in the hushed, secret heart of the royal chamber. Alright, settle in, friends. Time to gaze upwards, way up, into the velvety night sky. We're drifting into the fascinating world of astrology and how it wormed its way into the very stones of medieval castles. Think of it, towering walls, imposing keeps, and nestled somewhere, perhaps a dedicated chamber or even a purpose-built tower, an observatory. More than just a vantage point, this was often a focal point for understanding, predicting, and even influencing the destiny of the royal family, and by extension, the entire kingdom. Now let's gently unpack this. Astrology in the medieval period wasn't the fluffy horoscope readings you might skim through today. It was considered a serious academic pursuit, intertwined with astronomy, mathematics, and philosophy. Think of it as a blend of scientific observation and deeply held spiritual beliefs. Medieval scholars, often clerics or those attached to the royal court, meticulously charted the movements of the planets and stars. They believed that these celestial bodies held a direct influence over events on Earth, kind of like cosmic puppet masters, if you will, gently tugging on the strings of fate. And where better to conduct this celestial surveillance than a castle? These weren't just fortresses, they were centers of power, learning, and yes, sometimes, a little bit of esoteric experimentation. The castle's observatory became a strategic control room, in which the map of the heavens was being analyzed so that the terrestrial events could then be shaped. The location mattered. The height offered a clearer view of the horizon, unhampered by earthly obstructions. The castle's resources allowed for the construction and maintenance of astronomical instruments, from simple astrolabes to more complex devices for measuring angles and positions. The location enabled the scholars to be close to the royal family and provide the rulers with their insight directly, allowing them to advise the kings with what course of action to perform. Royal decisions, major events like coronations, marriages, even the declaration of war, these were often carefully timed, based on astrological forecasts. Think about it, a king contemplating a crucial decision might consult his astrologer. The astrologer in turn would analyze the current alignment of planets, looking for auspicious or inauspicious signs. For instance, a particularly favorable alignment might be deemed an ideal time to launch a military campaign, increasing the chances of victory. Conversely, an unfavorable alignment might warn against a particular course of action, urging caution and delay. Imagine the pressure on these medieval astrologers. They weren't just stargazers, they were advisors to the most powerful people in the land. Their predictions could influence the fate of nations, and their reputations and perhaps even their lives depended on their accuracy. No pressure, right? Now, what kind of things were they looking for up there? Well, a lot depended on the specific astrological system being used, and these varied across different regions and time periods. But some common themes emerge. The positions of the planets in relation to the zodiac signs were crucial. Each sign was associated with specific qualities and influences, and the planets passing through them were believed to take on those qualities. Aspects or angles between planets were also significant. Certain angles, like conjunctions, planets appearing close together, or oppositions, planets appearing on opposite sides of the sky, were thought to amplify or diminish the planet's influences. Eclipses, both solar and lunar, were particularly potent events, often viewed as harbingers of major change or upheaval. Comets, with their sudden and unpredictable appearances, were generally considered bad omens, portending disaster or the death of a ruler. Seriously, imagine seeing a comet and having to tell the king that this means he's doomed. Good luck sleeping with that one. The rising sign or ascendant was also incredibly important. This was the sign of the zodiac that was rising on the eastern horizon at the exact moment of a person's birth. It was believed to influence a person's personality, appearance, and overall destiny. Royal astrologers would meticulously calculate the ascendant for royal births, hoping to glean insights into the newborn's future reign. Think about the symbolism baked into the construction of the castle itself. It wasn't just about defense, it was about embodying a cosmic order. The number of towers, the orientation of the castle walls, even the placement of windows. These could all be imbued with astrological significance, designed to align the castle with favorable celestial energies. This is a bit like building the castle as a massive talisman, drawing down positive cosmic vibrations and deflecting negative ones. Spooky, huh? The rooms themselves would also be constructed using certain geometric principles, thought to amplify beneficial astrological influences. Maybe the throne room would be aligned with a particular constellation at the time of a king's coronation. Maybe the royal bedchamber would be designed to promote restful sleep and prophetic dreams. It's a whole other level of interior design, folks. And it wasn't just about grand, sweeping pronouncements about the fate of the kingdom. Astrology also played a role in more mundane aspects of castle life. The timing of agricultural activities, such as planting and harvesting, might be guided by astrological forecasts. Medical treatments such as bloodletting, a super common medieval procedure, were often performed at specific times of the lunar cycle. Furthermore, astrologers were key in charting the personal horoscopes of the royal family. Each family member's celestial imprint at the time of their birth was thought to be connected to who they were as a person. Astrological charts helped reveal the best course of action for each member of the court and royal family, so they could best fulfill their responsibilities and secure the lineage of their family. Each royal would have regular consultations with their personal astrologer to best chart a course through life. Of course, not everyone was a believer. Skepticism towards astrology existed even in the medieval period. Some viewed it as superstitious nonsense, a distraction from true religious devotion. Others questioned its accuracy, pointing to the apparent failures of astrological predictions. But despite the skepticism, astrology remained a powerful force in medieval society, particularly among the elite. It offered a framework for understanding the world, predicting the future, and influencing fate. And within the walls of medieval castles, far from the prying eyes of the common folk, these beliefs held particular sway, shaping royal decisions and perhaps even the course of history. So next time you gaze up at the night sky, remember those medieval astrologers, perched in their castle observatories, trying to decipher the secrets of the cosmos, and in doing so trying to shape the destiny of kings and kingdoms. It's a fascinating blend of science, spirituality, and power, all wrapped up in the mystery of the medieval world. Sweet dreams. Alright, settle in, friends. Let's delve into a particularly captivating chapter in the medieval occult story, the legend of the Knights Templar. secret rites, hidden chambers. It all sounds so intriguing, doesn't it? And of course the search for lost knowledge within those imposing castle walls. Makes you want to curl up with a good book, doesn't it? Now the Templars, they weren't just soldiers, you know. They were a powerful religious order, officially sanctioned by the Catholic Church of course, but whispers always followed them, didn't they? Whispers of forbidden knowledge, of secret rituals conducted in the shadows, of arcane power gleaned from sources unknown. It's enough to make your eyelids droop, just thinking about it. The Knights Templar, formerly known as the Poor Fellow Soldiers of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon, rose to prominence during the Crusades. Their primary mission was to protect pilgrims traveling to the Holy Land. Over time, they amassed immense wealth and power, acquiring vast estates, castles and fortresses across Europe and the Middle East. This wealth, you see, fueled suspicion. People started wondering, where did it all come from? And castles, of course, became central to the Templar mystique. These weren't just military outposts, they were centers of administration, of commerce, and allegedly, of esoteric activity. Think of the famous Templar preceptories, their commanderies, locations like Temple Church in London or Gisors Castle in France, places where, according to some, secrets were guarded more fiercely than any treasure. Just imagine, dozing off near centuries-old secrets. Ziz. The rumors started swirling about their initiation ceremonies. These weren't your average church services. Some accounts spoke of initiates being forced to deny Christ, to spit on the cross, to engage in, unorthodox practices. Now, were these true? Hard to say. The accusations came largely from their enemies, after all. But the idea of these ceremonies certainly stuck in people's minds. Then there's the Baphomet, a mysterious idol often depicted with a human body and a goat's head. The Templars were accused of worshipping Baphomet during their secret gatherings. What was Baphomet? Some say it was a pagan deity, others a symbol of forbidden knowledge, still others a coded representation of something else entirely. The real answer is lost to time, but the mystery surrounding it certainly makes you want to take a nap, doesn't it? A Baphomet-induced snooze. The search for lost knowledge is a recurring theme in the Templar lore. Did they unearth ancient texts beneath the Temple Mount in Jerusalem? Did they discover secrets of alchemy, of astrology, of Kabbalah? Some believe they possessed knowledge that could shake the very foundations of the church. Knowledge, perhaps, better left undisturbed. Think of them hunched over dusty tomes by candlelight. I'm getting sleepy just thinking about that kind of research. And those hidden chambers. The stuff of legends, secret passages leading to underground vaults, chambers concealed behind false walls. The very image evokes a feeling of drowsiness, doesn't it? What were these chambers used for? Were they repositories of forbidden texts? Were they places where secret rites were performed? Or were they simply storage rooms, misinterpreted by later generations? It's always more fun to believe in the secrets though, isn't it? The story of the Templars takes a dark turn, of course. In the early 14th century, King Philip IV of France, deeply in debt to the Templars and envious of their power, launched a brutal campaign to destroy the order. He accused them of heresy, of blasphemy, of all sorts of unspeakable crimes. Many Templars were arrested, tortured, and burned at the stake. Their wealth was seized, their order was dissolved. This persecution, of course, only fueled the legends. Did the Templars truly disappear, or did they go underground, safeguarding their secrets and biding their time? Some believe they fled to Scotland, taking refuge with their allies and playing a role in the rise of Freemasonry. Others believe they scattered across Europe, preserving their knowledge in secret societies. The idea of these secrets living on, it's enough to make you want to dream about it, doesn't it? Just drift away. The castles figure prominently in the narrative of the Templar downfall. Many of their fortresses were besieged, their treasures seized, their secrets, hopefully, not all revealed. The ruins of these castles continue to fascinate us, reminding us of the Templars' power, their mysteries, and their tragic fate. They're just crying out for someone to have a nice long nap on their steps. The legend of the Templars, it's a potent blend of history, mystery, and speculation. Did they possess forbidden knowledge? Did they engage in secret rites? Did they worship Baphomet? The answers, my friends, may never be fully known, but the legend itself, with its tales of hidden chambers, lost knowledge, and persecuted knights, continues to capture our imaginations. And that's good enough for a nice long contented doze, isn't it? Sweet dreams. Okay, let's settle in and delve into the rather curious connection between courtly love and, well, things that might make you raise an eyebrow in a medieval castle. Now, courtly love, we all have a rough idea, right? Knights in shining armor, damsels in distress, whispered sweet nothings, and maybe a stolen kiss behind a tapestry. But it was much more than just a medieval dating game. Courtly love was a complex code of conduct, a societal performance, almost a religion in itself. It involved very specific rules, protocols, and expectations. It was an idealized, often unrequited, and highly formalized adoration, usually between a knight and a noble woman, someone who was very often married to someone else, which does complicate things from the get-go. Think of it as a very elaborate game of emotional chess. The knight would devote himself entirely to the lady, performing deeds of valor in her name, composing poems, and generally acting as the most devoted and often suffering admirer imaginable. The lady, in turn, was expected to remain aloof, almost goddess-like, granting favors sparingly and testing the knight's devotion. It was all about the pursuit, the yearning, the unattainability. But here's where it gets a little blurry. This devotion, this absolute, unwavering adoration, started to take on a distinctly ritualistic quality. The knight wasn't just being nice, or even just trying to get a date. He was worshipping the lady. He was elevating her to a position of near-divine status. And that's where the line between romance and occult devotion becomes ever so fine, so very, very whispery. Consider the language used in courtly love poetry. It wasn't just flowery prose, it was often filled with religious imagery. The lady was described as a guiding star, a radiant sun, a source of grace and salvation. The knight's love for her was often described as a spiritual journey, a quest for enlightenment, a path to, well, something beyond the mundane. And remember that this was a time when religious symbolism saturated every aspect of life. People were incredibly attuned to the power of metaphor and allegory. Now, let's think about rituals. What are they? They're structured sets of actions, performed with a specific intention, often invoking some sort of higher power. And when you break it down, courtly love had many of the elements of a ritual. There were specific gestures, like kneeling before the lady, offering gifts, or reciting vows. There were specific times and places for these actions, often secluded gardens or private chambers within the castle. And there was a clear intention to gain the lady's favor, to prove one's worth, to transcend the limitations of earthly existence through love. Think about the symbolism woven into courtly love practices. The exchange of rings, the giving of tokens, the use of colors and emblems. All of these things carried specific meanings and were meant to invoke certain energies or influences. Just like in any other ritual, the participants were engaging in a symbolic act, meant to have a real-world effect. Of course, no one was explicitly calling courtly love a religion, but there were definitely whispers about it, especially from the church. Some clerics saw it as a dangerous distraction from true religious devotion, a form of idolatry in disguise. After all, if a knight was spending all his time worshipping a woman, He wasn't spending it praying to God, was he? And that, naturally, caused concern. But what if this blurring of lines was intentional? What if some practitioners of courtly love were consciously using its rituals and symbolism to explore deeper, more esoteric ideas? We have to remember that the medieval period was a time of intense religious fervor, but also of intense intellectual curiosity. People were fascinated by the mysteries of the universe, by the hidden powers of nature, and by the potential for human transformation. And maybe, just maybe, courtly love provided a framework for exploring these ideas in a way that was both socially acceptable and intellectually stimulating. It offered a safe space, within the confines of the castle walls, to experiment with ritual, symbolism, and the power of human emotion. Remember our cozy castle setting, with all its symbolic weight, and all the secrets it held. Consider the possibility that some of these courtly love rituals weren't just about winning a woman's heart. Maybe they were about something more esoteric. Maybe they were about unlocking hidden potentials within the self, or about connecting with a higher power through the act of devotion. Of course, it's impossible to say for sure what was going on in the minds of every medieval knight and noble woman. But the evidence suggests that the line between courtly love and occult devotion was far more blurred than we might think. And that, my friends, makes the castles of the Middle Ages even more intriguing, and perhaps just a little bit more magical, a little more whispery. Alright, let's settle in and talk about something a little subversive. We're moving away from the accepted narratives now, deeper into the shadows of the medieval castle, to a world of whispered dissent and hidden faith. We're talking about heresy, and how it might have found refuge within those very stone walls designed to keep it out. Now, when we think of medieval heresy, we often conjure up images of dramatic burnings at the stake, grand inquisitions, the real showy stuff. And that certainly happened. But what about the quiet resistance? Now, castles weren't just imposing fortresses, they were also homes, hospitals, and centers of community. And just like any community, they faced everyday problems, sickness, injuries, bad luck, and of course, the ever-present threat of attack. That's where magic and charms came in. Let's start with protecting the castle itself. Building a castle was a monumental undertaking, and medieval folks believed that more than just good engineering was needed to ensure its strength and safety. Charms and rituals were often performed during construction. Things like burying amulets in the foundations, scattering blessed herbs, or even reciting specific prayers or incantations. These weren't just superstitious gestures, they were seen as ways to imbue the castle with a protective energy, a kind of magical shield against harm. One common practice was the use of apotropaic symbols, which are basically symbols meant to ward off evil. You might find these carved above doorways, on walls, or even on furniture. Think of things like the triquetra, a three-cornered knot representing interconnectedness and protection, or the Sheila Nagig, a rather graphic carving of a woman meant to deflect negative energy with, its unconventional imagery. Grotesques and gargoyles, those strange and sometimes frightening figures perched on castle walls, weren't just decorative, they were believed to scare away evil spirits and keep the castle safe from harm. It's like having a really grumpy stone security guard. But magic wasn't just for defending against outside threats, it was also used to maintain harmony within the castle walls. Charms were used to ensure good harvests, to promote fertility in livestock, and even to prevent arguments among the household. Imagine a world where you could cast a spell to stop your in-laws from bickering. Now that's powerful magic. Of course, no discussion of magic in a medieval castle would be complete without mentioning healing. Medieval medicine was, shall we say, a bit hit or miss, so people often turned to magic and charms to supplement whatever medical care was available. Herbal remedies were of course a staple, but their effectiveness was often enhanced by prayers, incantations, or the wearing of amulets. For example, if someone was suffering from a fever, a charm might involve writing a prayer on a piece of parchment and tying it around the person's neck. Or, a specific herb might be chosen not just for its medicinal properties but also for its association with a particular saint or deity. The belief was that these actions would invoke divine aid and speed the healing process. Amulets were incredibly popular for protection against illness and injury. These could be anything from stones with natural holes in them believed to ward off evil spirits to small pouches containing herbs, relics, or written charms. The idea was that the amulet would act as a kind of personal shield, deflecting negative energy and promoting health and well-being. Now, let's talk about battles. Castles, after all, were built for war, and it makes sense that magic was employed to influence the outcome of conflicts. While knights and soldiers relied on swords and armor, they also carried charms and amulets for protection. A prayer inscribed on a banner, a relic sewn into a tunic, or a blessing bestowed upon a weapon. These were all ways to invoke divine favor and increase the chances of victory. Folk magic also played a role in predicting the outcome of battles. Divination, the art of foretelling the future, was widely practiced, and castle seers or wise women were often consulted to interpret omens and dreams. The movement of birds, the shape of clouds, even the way a fire burned, all of these could be interpreted as signs of what was to come. Based on these interpretations, rulers might make strategic decisions, choosing when to attack, when to defend, or even when to negotiate. It's like having a medieval weather forecast, but for war. It's important to remember that this wasn't some separate formalized system of magic, distinct from everyday life. This was folk magic, woven into the fabric of society, practiced by ordinary people. It wasn't the domain of powerful wizards or secretive covens, but rather a collection of beliefs, customs, and practices passed down through generations. And while the church often frowned upon certain forms of magic, especially those that involved invoking demonic forces, much of folk magic was tolerated, even embraced. After all, many of these practices were simply ways of expressing faith, seeking divine aid, and coping with the uncertainties of life. So the next time you see a medieval castle, remember that it was more than just a fortress. It was a place where the practical and the mystical intertwined, where magic and charms were used to protect, to heal, and to influence the course of events. It was a world where the line between the natural and the supernatural was often blurred, and where even the simplest act could be imbued with a touch of magic. Kinda cool, huh? Okay, settle in, friend, and let's gently drift into the world of dream divination within the sturdy walls of medieval castles. It's a bit like peering into a misty mirror, you know? All soft edges and hints of something more. In those days, dreams weren't just random firings of the brain. They were seen as messages, whispers from the divine, maybe, or warnings from the shadows. Castles, with their high towers and winding corridors, often housed a figure dedicated to untangling these nightly narratives, the castle seer. Sometimes they were called dream interpreters, or wise women, or even just old so-and-so who knows about dreams, but their role was pretty consistent to help the ruler, and sometimes even the court, understand what their subconscious was trying to tell them. Now you might be thinking, okay, so they just looked up symbols in a book, right? Well, sometimes yeah, dream interpretation guides existed, though they were far less standardized than, say, a modern dream dictionary. Think of them more as collections of common symbols and their potential meanings, passed down through generations and influenced by local folklore and religious beliefs. A lion, for instance, might generally symbolize courage and royalty, but depending on the context of the dream and the specifics of the region, it could also represent pride, anger, or even a specific enemy of the castle. But the really skilled seers did more than just flip through a book. They considered the dreamer, their personality, their current situation, their fears, their hopes. Everything played a part. A dream about a storm, for example, might mean one thing for a seasoned knight preparing for battle, perhaps a warning about overconfidence, and something completely different for a pregnant queen anxious about the succession, maybe a reflection of her inner turmoil and worries about the future. It was a holistic approach, really, a deeply personal reading of the subconscious landscape. The seers' methods weren't always straightforward either. Some used rituals to induce prophetic dreams, creating a sacred space, burning specific herbs, or chanting ancient incantations, all with the intention of opening a channel to the divine. Others might focus on the moment just before sleep. Maybe the dreamer would write down a question and place it under their pillow, hoping for an answer in their dreams. Or perhaps they would gaze into a crystal ball or a bowl of water, seeking to unlock their intuition and receive guidance. Think about the pressure on these seers, though. A ruler's decisions could hinge on their interpretations. If a king dreamed of a falling tower, did it mean his reign was about to crumble? If a queen saw ravens circling the castle, was it a sign of impending war? Getting it wrong could have serious consequences, not just for the ruler but for the seer themselves. Imagine having to tell a king that his dream meant he was going to lose the next battle. It would be a bit like telling a honey badger it was having a bad hair day. You need to be pretty confident, and of course there was always the risk of manipulation. A clever seer could use their position to influence the ruler, subtly guiding them towards certain decisions or actions. Imagine a seer whispering in the king's ear that his dream clearly showed that allying with the neighboring kingdom would bring prosperity and peace, when in reality, the seer was secretly in the neighboring kingdom's pocket. Power games played out even in the realm of dreams, it seems. Now, it's important to remember that these practices weren't always viewed positively by everyone. The church in particular often frowned upon dream divination, seeing it as a form of paganism or even demonic influence. After all, if dreams were messages from God, shouldn't those messages be delivered through prayer and scripture, not through some obscure ritual or the interpretation of a wise woman? Many seers operated in secrecy, carefully guarding their knowledge and practices to avoid accusations of heresy or witchcraft. It really was a game of risk versus reward. Despite the risks, the belief in the power of dreams persisted throughout the medieval period. Rulers sought guidance, commoners sought answers, and the castle seer stood at the crossroads of the conscious and unconscious, trying to make sense of the nightly visions that shaped their world. So the next time you have a particularly vivid dream, maybe you'll think about those medieval castle seers and wonder what hidden messages your own subconscious might be trying to send you, huh? Might make you think twice about that nightmare you had where you were naked and everyone was pointing and laughing. Maybe something more to it than you thought. Alright, settle in close friends. Let's drift into a topic that gets the castle stones themselves whispering necromancy, and where better to practice such a delicate art than in the castle graveyard. Now when we say necromancy, visions of robed figures and chanting probably dance in your head, and, well, sometimes that was the vibe. But it's important to remember that in the medieval world, things were often a little more practical, less about raising hordes of the undead, and more about getting answers. Think of it as medieval Google, but with corpses. You see, for many, death wasn't necessarily the end. The veil between worlds was considered thin, especially in places like graveyards, liminal spaces as they were known, existing between the living and the dead. And if that veil was thin, well, maybe, just maybe, you could nudge it aside. The motivations for dabbling in necromancy were varied. Sometimes it was simple curiosity. Imagine you lost a loved one suddenly, perhaps to plague or war. Wouldn't you want to know if they were at peace, or if they had any unfinished business? Necromancy offered a way to potentially gain that closure, that reassurance. But of course, darker motives were at play too. Knowledge, as they say, is power. And who holds more secrets than the dead? Think of lost treasures, hidden conspiracies, the true parentage of a claimant to the throne, all potentially locked away in the minds of those who had passed. Imagine the temptation to bypass all the messy politics and intrigue and simply ask someone who knew the answer. And then there was the pursuit of power, pure and simple. Some believed that spirits of the dead could be bound to serve the living, offering protection, granting favors, or even inflicting curses. It's easy to see how such a belief could corrupt, leading individuals down a dangerous path. So, how did these medieval necromancers actually do it? Well, the rituals themselves were often elaborate and deeply personal. There wasn't exactly a necromancy for dummies textbook floating around. Knowledge was passed down through whispers, secret societies, and grimoires, books of spells and incantations. Typically, the graveyard was the stage. Midnight, naturally, was the preferred hour. The necromancer, often a priest or scholar familiar with Latin and ritual, would prepare the ground. Circles might be drawn, symbols inscribed, and offerings made. These offerings could range from simple things like bread and wine to, well, let's just say more unsettling things depending on the spirit being summoned. The incantations themselves were crucial. Latin prayers, mixed with invocations of demonic entities, were common. The goal was to create a space of power, a bridge between worlds, and to compel the spirit to appear. Fasting and abstinence were often practiced beforehand to purify the body and mind, to make oneself a clearer channel for the spirits. And then, the waiting. The silence, the feeling of being watched. If the ritual worked, the spirit would manifest, maybe as a flickering light, a cold breeze, a disembodied voice, or in more dramatic accounts, as a fully formed apparition. The questioning began, precise, respectful, but firm. You didn't want to offend the spirit, but you also needed to get the information you sought, and of course you had to be wary. Spirits, even if compelled, were not always truthful. They could lie, mislead, or even turn on the necromancer if given the chance. The ultimate danger, of course, was demonic interference. Many believed that necromancy opened a door to the demonic realm, and that malevolent entities could impersonate the dead, offering false information or even seizing control of the ritual. The necromancer had to be prepared to defend themselves, armed with prayers, symbols, and a strong will. Now, how prevalent was necromancy in medieval castles? It's hard to say for sure. These were, by their very nature, secret practices. No one was exactly advertising their services as a spirit communicator. But we can infer its presence through scattered accounts in chronicles, trial records, and of course the ever-reliable rumor mill. Castles, with their graveyards often located nearby, their hidden chambers, and their atmosphere of power and intrigue, were certainly conducive to such activities. Think about it. A lord desperate for an heir might consult a spirit about his wife's fertility. A besieged commander might seek information about the enemy's plans. A king might even attempt to contact a deceased ancestor for guidance on matters of state. And what about the castle graveyards themselves? They weren't always the neatly ordered rows of tombstones we might imagine today. Often they were simply patches of consecrated ground near the castle walls, where the dead were buried with minimal ceremony. This anonymity, this lack of clear boundaries, may have actually made them more appealing for necromantic rituals. The bones, the earth, the very essence of death were readily available. And in a world where life was often short and brutal, the line between respect for the dead and exploitation of their remains could become blurred. So the next time you see a medieval castle, imagine not just the knights and lords, the feasts and battles, but also the whispered incantations in the dead of night, the flickering candles in the graveyard, the desperate attempts to pierce the veil between worlds. It's a chilling thought, isn't it? But it's also a reminder that the medieval world was far more complex, far more mysterious than we often give it credit for. Okay, let's settle in and talk about castles, not just the grand halls and imposing towers, but the very ground beneath them. You see, building a medieval castle wasn't just a matter of blueprints and stonemasons. It was steeped in ritual, superstition, and a deep desire to ensure the structure's, well, its lasting strength and protection. Think about it. You're about to erect a massive fortress, a symbol of power, and a bulwark against enemies. You wouldn't just start digging, right? You'd want to ensure the land itself was agreeable. So the process often began with divination. Seeking the right location wasn't just about strategic advantage. It was about finding a place where the earth itself held favorable energies. Geomancy, a form of divination that interprets patterns in the earth, was sometimes employed. They'd look for natural features like springs, rock formations, or even the way trees grew, believing these indicated the presence of telluric currents, earth energies. Once a location was chosen, various rituals might be performed to purify the ground. This could involve processions with religious relics, the recitation of prayers, and even the burial of consecrated objects. The idea was to cleanse the site of any negative influences and dedicate it to a higher purpose. Salt, believed to have purifying properties, might be sprinkled around the perimeter. And let's not forget the power of intention. The entire construction process was imbued with the hopes and fears of those involved, and these emotions were believed to imprint themselves upon the very stones. Now, let's get to the foundation itself. This was a crucial stage, laden with symbolism and perhaps a little bit of unsettling practice. The laying of the cornerstone, the first stone of the foundation, was often accompanied by elaborate ceremonies. This wasn't just a symbolic gesture, it was seen as imbuing the entire structure with stability and power. A priest would bless the stone, prayers would be offered, and perhaps even relics or amulets would be placed beneath it. These weren't just religious acts, they were intended to safeguard the castle from harm, both physical and, well, spiritual. Here's where things get a bit murky. There's evidence, both archaeological and anecdotal, suggesting that in some instances, animal sacrifices were performed during the foundation laying ceremony. A bull, a sheep, even a rooster might be offered, their blood believed to strengthen the foundation and appease any earth spirits that might be disturbed by the construction. And, in rarer, far more hushed whispers, there are tales of human sacrifice. These stories are, thankfully, much less common and often shrouded in legend, but they persist, hinting at a darker side to medieval construction practices. The idea, as unsettling as it is, was that the sacrifice would provide the ultimate protection, binding a human soul to the castle's fate, ensuring its longevity. Beyond sacrifice, other methods were employed to ensure the castle's strength. For example, builders might incorporate objects believed to possess magical properties into the foundation. Crystals, thought to amplify energy, might be placed beneath the cornerstone. A horseshoe, a symbol of good luck, might be embedded in the wall, and of course, there were charms and spells. Inscriptions with protective sigils or prayers might be carved into the stones themselves. These weren't always visible, they were often hidden, intended to work their magic unseen. The materials themselves were also considered important. Certain types of stone were believed to possess inherent protective qualities. For example, granite, a hard and durable stone, was often favored for its strength and resilience. Oak, a strong and long-lasting wood, was used for structural beams and doors, believed to embody strength and endurance. And the process of quarrying and transporting these materials was itself steeped in ritual and tradition. The stonemasons, often members of secretive guilds, possessed specialized knowledge and skills, and their work was seen as more than just a trade. It was a craft imbued with ancient wisdom. But you know what else is interesting? The orientation of the castle itself. Many castles were carefully aligned with specific astronomical events, such as the sunrise on a solstice or the alignment of certain stars. This wasn't just about aesthetics, it was believed to connect the castle to cosmic energies, drawing down power from the heavens. The castle, in effect, became a microcosm of the universe, reflecting the order and harmony of the cosmos. And finally, let's not forget the role of the builders themselves. The master mason, the architect of the castle, held a position of great respect and authority. He was not just a skilled craftsman, he was also a keeper of secrets, a guardian of ancient knowledge. He understood the symbolism of the design, the significance of the materials, and the power of the rituals involved. He was in a sense the castle's magician, ensuring its strength and protection through a combination of skill, knowledge, and a deep understanding of the unseen forces at play. So the next time you see a medieval castle, remember that it's not just a pile of stones, it's a testament to human ingenuity, a symbol of power, and a repository of ancient beliefs and practices. A fascinating blend of the practical and the, well, perhaps a little bit magical. All right, settle in, friends. let's drift into a fascinating corner of castle lore, the secret language woven into their very structure, the way medieval minds used numbers and shapes to speak to the cosmos, and maybe even influence reality itself. We're talking about the symbolism of numbers, sacred geometry, and how numerology found its way into castle design. Now, when we say numerology, I don't want you picturing some modern-day fortune teller with a crystal ball. In the medieval world, numbers weren't just for counting sheep or calculating taxes. They were believed to hold deep, inherent meaning, reflecting divine order and the structure of the universe. Think of it as a language of the heavens, a way to connect the earthly realm with the celestial. This fascination with numbers, this belief in their inherent power, seeped into everything, especially architecture, and where better to express power, both earthly and spiritual, than in a castle. Castles weren't just piles of stones thrown together. They were carefully planned, meticulously designed structures, often built with symbolic intent. Let's start with the number 1. Seems simple enough, right? But in medieval thought, 1 represented unity, the divine, God himself. A single strong tower dominating the landscape could symbolize the singular power of the Lord, his unwavering authority, a reflection of God's singular dominance. Moving on to the number 2, we find duality, balance, opposition. Think of the paired gatehouses, the twin towers flanking an entrance. These weren't just for defense, they also represented the balance of power, the ability to both defend and attack, the yin and yang of medieval warfare, if you will. 3. The sacred 3. This number pops up everywhere, and for good reason. It represents the Holy Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. You might find 3 chapels within a castle complex, or perhaps the castle is designed around 3 distinct baileys, each serving a different purpose, yet united in the overall design. The trefoil arch, a common architectural feature with its 3 lobes, is another subtle nod to the Trinity. 4 is another cornerstone of medieval symbolism. It represents the 4 elements: earth, air, fire, and water, the foundation of the physical world. It also represents the 4 cardinal directions. A castle built on a square plan, with towers at each corner, could be seen as an embodiment of these fundamental principles, a microcosm of the world itself, securely grounded and oriented to the heavens. Now, things get really interesting when we start talking about sacred geometry. This is where mathematics meets spirituality, where shapes are seen as reflections of divine proportions and cosmic order. The most famous example is the golden ratio, often represented by the Greek letter phi. This ratio, approximately 1.618, appears throughout nature, from the spiral of a seashell to the branching of trees. Medieval architects believed that by incorporating the golden ratio into their designs, they could create structures that were not only aesthetically pleasing but also in harmony with the universe. Imagine a castle facade where the height of the towers is related to the width of the gatehouse by the golden ratio. It wouldn't just look good, it would resonate with a deeper cosmic harmony. Another key shape is the circle, representing perfection, eternity, and the divine. Round towers, often used in later medieval castles, weren't just more structurally sound, they also symbolized the infinite, the unbroken cycle of life and death. The rose windows in castle chapels, with their intricate circular designs, are another example of this symbolism, drawing the eye upwards towards the heavens. The square, as we mentioned earlier, represents the earthly realm, the physical world. Combining the square and the circle, squaring the circle, as it's sometimes called, was a symbolic act of uniting the earthly and the divine, bringing heaven down to earth. You might see this in the layout of a castle courtyard, a square enclosed within a circular wall, a physical manifestation of this union. Even the layout of the castle complex itself could be imbued with symbolic meaning. The placement of the chapel, for example, was rarely accidental. It was often located on the eastern side of the castle, facing the rising sun, symbolizing the resurrection of Christ and the triumph of light over darkness. The Great Hall, the heart of the castle, where the Lord held court and feasted with his followers, was often designed to reflect his power and status. The height of the ceiling, the size of the windows, the arrangement of the tables, all contributed to an atmosphere of grandeur and authority, reinforcing his position at the center of the social order. But what about specific numbers and their influence on castle design? Let's consider the number 7. 7 was a number of completion and perfection, linked to the 7 planets known in medieval times, the 7 days of the week, and the 7 virtues. You might find 7 arrow slits strategically placed in a tower, or perhaps the castle is constructed over 7 years, subtle but significant. The number 12, representing the 12 apostles, the 12 tribes of Israel, and the 12 signs of the zodiac, was another potent symbol. A castle with 12 turrets along its walls could be invoking this sense of completeness and divine order, a representation of the entire cosmos within its walls. Now, it's important to remember that we're not always dealing with conscious, deliberate symbolism. Sometimes the use of these numbers and shapes was simply part of the architectural tradition, a way of building that had been passed down through generations, imbued with meaning over time. Other times, it might have been a more personal expression of faith or belief on the part of the lord or the architect. Perhaps the lord was particularly devoted to a specific saint whose number held special significance. Or perhaps the architect was a member of a secret society, incorporating hidden symbols into the design for initiates to recognize. The truth is, we can only speculate about the intentions behind these design choices, but the evidence is there, woven into the very fabric of the castles themselves. The numbers, the shapes, the layouts, all speak to a worldview where the physical and the spiritual were inextricably linked, where mathematics and faith were intertwined, and where even the stones themselves could tell a story. So, next time you visit a medieval castle, take a closer look, count the towers, examine the arches, and consider the proportions. You might just discover a hidden language, a secret code, revealing the deeper meaning embedded in these magnificent structures. And who knows, you might even feel a connection to the cosmic forces that medieval builders believed they were harnessing. It's all there, waiting to be discovered, if you know where to look. Alright, settle in friends, let's talk about something a little earthy. The apothecary in a medieval castle, more than just cough syrup and bandages. I promise, think of it as a combination of a modern-day pharmacy, a herbalist shop, and maybe, just maybe, a little bit of a witch's brew kitchen. Now, before we get into the really interesting stuff, let's set the scene. Castles weren't exactly known for their pristine hygiene, right? So illness was a pretty common visitor. Infections, injuries from battles, or just daily life. And of course, the ever-present threat of, well, let's just say sanitation wasn't their strong suit. That's where the apothecary, or someone fulfilling that role, became pretty darn important. Herbs were the cornerstone of medieval medicine. Think about it. No synthetic drugs back then. Nature was your pharmacy. And castles often had gardens, sometimes quite extensive, where medicinal herbs were cultivated. Things like mint for stomach aches, chamomile for calming nerves. And trust me, running a castle involved a lot of nerves. And sage for, well, sage was used for practically everything. Sore throats, digestive issues, even snake bites. It was the medieval equivalent of duct tape. Fixed almost everything. But it wasn't just about growing herbs. It was about knowing when to harvest them and how to prepare them. Drying, infusing in oils, making tinctures with alcohol, which by the way was also often brewed within the castle walls. All these were crucial skills, and these skills were usually passed down through generations, often within families who served the castle. There was a lot of practical knowledge there, a kind of folk wisdom that's easy to dismiss now, but back then it was vital. Now let's get to the potions. These weren't just simple herbal teas. Potions could be complex concoctions, involving dozens of ingredients, carefully measured and combined according to specific recipes. Some were designed for healing, like wound salves made with honey and plantain. Honey, by the way, was highly valued, not just for its sweetness but for its antiseptic properties. Others were for more, well, let's call them specific purposes. Think love potions. Now, whether these actually worked is debatable, but the belief in their power was very real. Ingredients like vervain and mandrake were often associated with love and desire, and if you slipped a little something into someone's wine, well, who knows what might happen. And then of course there were the poisons. Now I know it sounds a bit dramatic, but castles were centers of power, and power struggles could get messy. Arsenic was a favorite, tasteless and relatively easy to obtain. Other poisons were derived from plants, like hemlock and monkshood. Knowing how to identify these plants, and how to extract their deadly properties, was a skill that could be, well, let's just say it could be useful. Of course, not all poisons were intended for murder. Sometimes small doses of certain toxins were used medicinally. This is the principle of Mithridatism, gradually building up immunity to a poison by ingesting small increasing amounts. It was risky to say the least, but if you were a king constantly worried about being poisoned, it might seem like a worthwhile gamble. But here's where it gets really interesting. Because the line between medicine and magic wasn't always clear in the Middle Ages. Many ingredients believed to have medicinal properties were also associated with magical powers. Mandrake root, for example, was thought to scream when pulled from the ground, and its shape often resembled a human figure, leading to beliefs about its ability to protect against evil spirits. Or think about precious stones, crushed and added to elixirs. They weren't just for show, each was thought to have a certain energy that would influence one's health. So the castle apothecary wasn't just a place for mixing herbs and dispensing remedies. It was a place where science and superstition, healing and harm were intertwined. It was a place where knowledge was power, and where the secrets of nature could be used for good or for ill. A sleepy yet dangerous place indeed. Makes you wonder what went on after dark, doesn't it? Okay. Let's gently ease into a fascinating corner of medieval castles, the enduring influence of older pagan traditions. Now, when we talk about paganism in this context, we're not necessarily conjuring images of large-scale organized religions directly competing with Christianity. Instead, think of it as a collection of older beliefs, folk customs, and ritual practices deeply embedded in the cultural fabric of Europe. Passed down through generations, these traditions weren't simply wiped away with the arrival of Christianity. Far from it. They subtly adapted, morphed, and perhaps most interestingly, intertwined with the new dominant faith. Think of it like this. Imagine a river flowing through a landscape. Christianity is a major, powerful current, but the older pagan streams still trickle and carve their own paths, sometimes merging with the main flow, sometimes running alongside it unseen, yet always present. Within the seemingly staunch Christian environment of a medieval castle, remnants of these older beliefs persisted in surprisingly visible ways. Why? Because castles were not just religious centers, they were practical lived-in spaces, governed by people with everyday concerns, health, fertility, prosperity, and protection from harm. And these were exactly the areas where pagan traditions had always held sway. One significant area of influence was in folk medicine and healing practices. Long before formal medical training existed, people relied on herbal remedies, charms, and rituals rooted in ancient knowledge. These traditions, often passed down through women in families and communities, involved understanding the properties of plants, the power of specific words or incantations, and the significance of lunar cycles or other natural rhythms. So while a castle might have a chaplain offering prayers for the sick, the lady of the castle, or a trusted local wise woman, would likely be brewing up herbal concoctions and reciting ancient charms to aid in the healing process. The two approaches weren't necessarily seen as contradictory, rather they represented complementary ways of seeking divine intervention and practical assistance. Another fascinating example lies in agricultural rituals and seasonal celebrations. The Christian calendar incorporated many pre-existing pagan festivals, often reinterpreting them with Christian meanings. Think of Yule becoming Christmas, or Imbolc transforming into Candlemas. Within the castle walls, these seasonal shifts would have been keenly observed. Agricultural success was paramount to the castle's survival. So even as the chaplain led prayers for a bountiful harvest, the villagers might still be enacting older fertility rites, perhaps involving symbolic offerings to the land, or the construction of corn dollies representing the spirit of the harvest, all to ensure nature's continued generosity. Again, it's a fusion of beliefs and practices, a layering of the new onto the old. Consider also the realm of charms and amulets. While the church frowned upon anything resembling overt magic, the use of protective objects was incredibly common. A small bag of herbs worn around the neck to ward off illness, a horseshoe nailed above the castle gate to bring good luck, or a carved stone with symbolic imagery placed in the foundation to ensure the castle's stability. These were all examples of how pagan beliefs permeated daily life. These objects were often subtly Christianized, perhaps incorporating a cross or a saint's name, effectively blending the protective power of the old ways with the blessings of the new faith. This blending was a pragmatic solution. People wanted to ensure they had covered all bases, both spiritually and practically. Animal symbolism, prevalent in pre-Christian religions, also found a place within the medieval Christian framework. Certain animals, like the stag or the bear, held specific meanings related to power, fertility, or protection. While the overt worship of animals was discouraged, their symbolic representation persisted in heraldry, tapestries, and other forms of castle decoration. A coat of arms featuring a lion, for instance, conveyed strength and courage, drawing on both Christian and pre-Christian associations. The animals featured in bestiaries, popular illustrated books in the Middle Ages, often had both religious and secular meanings, representing moral qualities as well as drawing on older pagan symbolism. Now, it's important to acknowledge that the church actively tried to suppress what it perceived as dangerous pagan practices. Witch hunts, although more prevalent in the later medieval and early modern periods, reflected a deep-seated anxiety about the persistence of these older beliefs, particularly those associated with female power and knowledge. However, the very fact that the church felt the need to combat these traditions underscores their enduring influence. Ultimately, the influence of pagan traditions within medieval castles wasn't about a full-scale rejection of Christianity. Instead, it was a testament to the resilience and adaptability of older beliefs, subtly shaping the worldview and practices of the people who lived within those imposing stone walls. It reveals a fascinating tapestry of faith, where the ancient and the modern, the sacred and the practical, were interwoven into the very fabric of medieval life. And that gives us a much richer, more nuanced understanding of the medieval world, doesn't it? It's about appreciating the layers of belief and practice that shaped daily life, even within the heart of Christian society. Alright, settle in, friends. Let's talk about animals. They were everywhere in medieval castles, weren't they? Not just the noble steeds we picture in shining armor, but a whole menagerie that played a vital role in the daily lives of everyone from the king to the scullery maid. And, well, let's just say their significance went far beyond simple practicality. Things got a little symbolic, a little occult. Now, your typical castle animal lineup probably included things like horses, of course. War horses, sturdy enough to carry knights in full plate, were symbols of power and nobility. These weren't just modes of transport, they were extensions of the knight himself, representing his strength, his valor, his very identity. Think of them as the medieval equivalent of a souped-up sports car, only with more bloodshed. Then you had your work animals, oxen for ploughing the fields, essential for keeping the castle fed. These guys, unlike the showy war horses, represented the more grounded aspects of life: hard labor, fertility, and the bounty of the earth. They were the unsung heroes, the backbone of the castle's agricultural efforts. And let's not forget the dogs. Hunting dogs were prized possessions, crucial for providing meat and sport. They were symbols of loyalty, obedience, and skill. But even common dogs served important functions as guards, companions, and, well, general castle mascots. They kept the rat population down too, an absolutely vital service that shouldn't be overlooked. Cats, of course, were also employed in the eternal battle against rodents. A good Mauser was worth their weight in, well, probably not gold, but certainly in cheese. They were seen as cunning and independent, and their association with the night probably contributed to some of the more interesting beliefs surrounding them. Pigs, sheep, and chickens were castle livestock, providing meat, wool, eggs, and fertilizer. They were symbols of domesticity, abundance, and the cyclical nature of life. Nothing too spooky there, right? Wrong. See, in the medieval mind, everything had layers of meaning. The physical world reflected a deeper spiritual reality. And animals, well, they weren't just animals. They were living symbols, potent with power, connecting humanity to the divine or the demonic. Take the lion, for example. We saw the lion as a symbol of strength, courage, and royalty. It was the king of beasts, and its image was plastered all over heraldry, architecture, and tapestries. But in occult terms, the lion could also represent the sun, a powerful force of creation and destruction. Alchemists often used the lion as a symbol of the prima materia, the raw substance that needed to be transformed into gold. This wasn't just about literal gold, mind you. It was about spiritual transformation, the purification of the soul. The snake, meanwhile, had a seriously mixed reputation. On one hand, it could represent wisdom, healing. Think of the serpent coiled around the staff of Asclepius, and renewal, because snakes shed their skin, you see. On the other hand, it was the symbol of temptation, deception, and of course the original sin in the Garden of Eden. In occult practices, the snake could represent both the Kundalini energy, the spiritual power coiled at the base of the spine, and the forces of chaos and darkness. Depending on the context, it could be a force for good or evil. And then we get to the really interesting stuff: ritual sacrifice. Now, before you get all squeamish, let's be clear, ritual animal sacrifice wasn't exactly commonplace in medieval castles. Overtly practicing pagan rituals, especially ones involving blood, was a surefire way to earn a one-way ticket to the Inquisition's headquarters. However, there's evidence to suggest that these practices, or at least echoes of them, persisted, often hidden beneath a veneer of Christian symbolism. The purpose of animal sacrifice, in its most basic form, was to appease the gods or spirits, to gain their favor, or to influence events. The choice of animal was crucial. Each animal was associated with specific powers and attributes. A bull, for example, might be sacrificed to ensure fertility or strength. A lamb, on the other hand, might be offered as a symbol of purity or innocence. Within the walls of a castle, such sacrifices may have been performed in secret, in hidden chambers, or disguised as religious ceremonies. The chapel itself, with its inherent holiness, could have served as a convenient location. Imagine a seemingly pious offering of a dove, its symbolic connotations of peace and the Holy Spirit. However, imagine too, this offering made in a very particular alignment, with specific spoken incantations, perhaps with the express aim of influencing a battle or ending an illness of a lord. The entrails of the sacrificed animal were often examined for omens. The way the animal died, the color and condition of its organs, all could be interpreted as signs from the spiritual realm. It's even been said that some more powerful lords possessed their own wise women's or indeed men, charged with interpreting these signs for them, and thus steering the ship of the house to calmer waters. Now, even if a full-blown animal sacrifice wasn't on the cards, there were other ways to incorporate animal symbolism into occult practices. A charm made from a rabbit's foot might be used for good luck. Feathers from certain birds might be used in spells to influence the weather. Bones might be used in divination rituals to communicate with the dead. The medieval world was full of symbolism, hidden meanings, and esoteric practices, and animals as integral parts of castle life were deeply woven into this intricate web. So the next time you picture a medieval castle, don't just think of knights and ladies and grand feasts. Remember the animals, their practical roles, their symbolic meanings, and the hidden rituals that may have taken place in the shadows. After all, behind the impressive stone walls, secrets whispered on the wind, and sometimes those secrets had 4 legs and a tail. Alright, let's settle in and consider a particularly unsettling chapter in the story of medieval castles, the rise of the Inquisition and its impact on those suspected of occult practices. Now, the medieval period wasn't exactly known for its tolerance, was it? But the Inquisition, especially after the 13th century, ratcheted things up to a whole new level. We often picture witch hunts happening out in the countryside, little villages gripped by fear, and that definitely happened. But castles, those centers of power and control, became stages for the darker side of religious persecution. So what was the Inquisition actually looking for? Well, occultism, as a specific term, wasn't really used the way we understand it today. Instead, they were concerned with heresy, anything that deviated from the accepted doctrines of the church, and that could encompass a wide range of things, from outright devil worship, in their eyes of course, to practicing folk magic for healing, or even just holding unorthodox beliefs about God. Imagine you're the lord of a castle. Maybe you've got an interest in alchemy, trying to turn lead into gold in your private laboratory, or perhaps your wife consults a local wise woman about herbal remedies for the sick. Suddenly, an inquisitor arrives at your gates, an official of the church, wielding immense power, investigating rumors of heresy within your walls. It wouldn't be a great position to be in, right? The trials themselves, well, they were hardly fair. Accusations were often based on hearsay, grudges, or just plain old fear. The accused rarely had the right to legal representation, and the rules of evidence were pretty much non-existent. And let's not forget torture. Oh yeah, that was a big one. Inquisitors were authorized to use torture to extract confessions. Now think about the setting. You're dragged down to the castle dungeon, cold, damp and dark. The Inquisitor stands before you, flanked by guards. They present you with a list of accusations, vague and terrifying, and then the instruments of torture are brought out. The rack, thumbscrews, the strappado. It wasn't a pretty picture. Under that kind of duress, many people would confess to anything just to make the pain stop. And those confessions, whether true or not, sealed their fate. Castles, with their built-in prisons and isolated locations, became ideal spaces for these interrogations. The very structure of the castle reinforced the power of the inquisitors and the helplessness of the accused. The castle walls, meant to keep enemies out, now served to keep the accused trapped within. And what about the forbidden knowledge? The Inquisition wasn't just concerned with punishing individuals. They also sought to suppress ideas they deemed dangerous. Books on magic, alchemy, astrology, these were confiscated and often burned. Libraries were purged. The goal was to eradicate any trace of occult beliefs and practices, to ensure that the true faith remained unchallenged. Of course, this wasn't always successful. Many occult traditions went underground, passed on in secret from one generation to the next. The very act of persecution may have even added to their mystique, making them even more appealing to those who felt marginalized or oppressed by the church. Now, what was the long-term impact of all this? Well, the witch hunts of the medieval and early modern periods had a devastating effect on European society. Thousands of innocent people, mostly women, were accused, tortured, and executed. It created an atmosphere of fear and suspicion that permeated all levels of society, even within castle walls. The suppression of knowledge, too, had a lasting impact. While the Inquisition didn't succeed in completely eliminating occult traditions, it did drive them underground, making it harder to study and understand them. It also contributed to a climate of intellectual conservatism that may have slowed the progress of scientific inquiry in some areas. But thinking about castles specifically, the Inquisition really left an imprint on our perception of these imposing structures. They became associated not just with power and majesty, but also with darkness, repression, and hidden secrets. The image of the castle dungeon, where so many accused of heresy met their fate, continues to haunt our imaginations. So, next time you see a medieval castle, remember that there's more to its story than just knights and battles. Think about the inquisitors who stalked its halls, the prisoners who languished in its dungeons, and the knowledge that was suppressed within its walls. It's a reminder that even the most magnificent structures can be touched by the darkness of human history. Alright, settle in, friends. It's time to delve into a specific place, a specific story, a specific haunted history. Let's journey to France, to the Loire Valley, and to the imposing Château de Brissac. Now, castles, as we've discussed, are prime real estate for legends, aren't they? Brissac, however, seems to have earned its reputation more than most. It boasts, or perhaps suffers from, a resident ghost, a rather famous one at that, known as the Green Lady, or La Dame Verte in French. And where there's a ghost, well, often there's a story of occult activity, or at least allegations thereof. Château de Brissac stands tall, literally. It's one of the highest castles in the Loire Valley, a region known for its stunning architecture and rich history. Originally built as a fortress in the 11th century, it was later rebuilt in the 15th century by the Brissac family. Its size and grandeur make it a natural setting for grand stories, and darker whispered ones too. But where does the legend of the Green Lady come from? What tragic tale clings to those ancient stones? The most popular version tells us of a woman named Charlotte de Valois, the illegitimate daughter of King Charles VII. In the 15th century, Charlotte was married to Jacques de Brissac, the Lord of Brissac. It was, as many royal marriages were, a political arrangement, perhaps one that offered certain freedoms to those who held power. The story goes that Jack, while often away on business or matters of court, began to suspect Charlotte of infidelity. Driven by jealousy, or perhaps simply a lordly sense of entitlement, he returned to the chateau unexpectedly one night. What he found, or thought he found, has become the stuff of legend. It's said he discovered Charlotte in the arms of another man, a huntsman, right there in the castle. Overcome with rage, Jack murdered them both, or ordered them murdered. The details are, understandably, a little murky after all these centuries. Now, why Green Lady? It's said that Charlotte was wearing a green dress at the time of her death, so she became forever associated with that color and that fateful night. But it's not just her attire that's remembered. Witnesses claim to see her wandering the castle halls, particularly in the chapel and the tower room, where she supposedly met her end. And as you might expect, she's not exactly a silent presence. The Green Lady is said to emit moans and cries, sounds of anguish that echo through the ancient stones. Some visitors have even reported seeing her face, or rather, half her face. The legend claims she was stabbed multiple times, and her face bears the marks of that brutal attack. Understandably, this is quite unsettling for anyone encountering it. But what about occult activity? Where does that come into play? Well, Brissac, like many old castles, has layers of history, secrets buried within its walls. The story of Charlotte de Valois is certainly dramatic, but it's only one piece of the puzzle. Over the centuries, the castle has been home to various members of the Brissac family, each with their own interests, beliefs, and yes, perhaps even dabblings in the esoteric. Now, there's no concrete evidence of full-blown occult rituals being performed within the castle walls, but the idea of it, the possibility of it, has fueled speculation for generations. Consider the setting, a grand, isolated castle, steeped in history and legend, with secret passages, hidden rooms, and a resident ghost. It's practically begging for stories of secret societies, forbidden knowledge, and clandestine gatherings. Think about all the things we've discussed in previous episodes: alchemy, astrology, demonic invocation. It's easy to see how Brissac, shrouded in mystery, could become a focal point for such narratives, even if no proof exists that such activities happened. And remember what we touched on in the intro about the appeal of occult practices in medieval castles. It's not just about spooky rituals, it's about power, control, the search for hidden knowledge and immortality. Medieval lords, like the Brissacs, held immense power within their domain. They were essentially rulers, accountable to few. It's not hard to imagine some of them being drawn to esoteric practices, seeking to enhance their power, influence their destiny, or perhaps even cheat death itself. Now, while we can't say for sure whether occult rituals were performed at Brissac, we can see how the legend of the Green Lady has become intertwined with the perception of the castle as a place of mystery and intrigue. The tragic tale of Charlotte de Valois has created an atmosphere of sorrow and unrest, making it easier to believe that darker, more sinister things may have happened within those walls. Even today, Château de Brissac is open to the public. You can tour the castle, explore its grand halls, and even stay overnight. And yes, some guests have reported experiencing strange phenomena, hearing unexplained noises, or even catching a glimpse of the Green Lady herself. Whether these are genuine paranormal encounters, or simply the result of suggestion and a healthy dose of imagination is, of course, up for debate. But one thing is certain: Château de Brissac continues to captivate and intrigue, its history and legends woven together into a compelling tapestry of mystery and haunting beauty. It acts as a potent reminder that castles weren't just fortresses or homes, they were stages for drama, secrets, and perhaps, just perhaps, something a little darker. A place where fact and fiction, history and legend blend together to create stories that continue to whisper through the ages. And stories like that, well, they're just too good to ignore. Alright, so we've explored the grandeur and ghostly tales of Château de Brissac. Now let's journey eastward, shall we? To a castle carved not just into the landscape, but seemingly from the landscape itself. We're heading to Prejama Castle in Slovenia, a fortress that whispers stories of cunning, resilience, and perhaps, just perhaps, a touch of the occult woven into its very stone. Prejama Castle is truly a sight to behold. Imagine a formidable structure nestled halfway up a towering cliff face, seemingly emerging directly from the rock. This isn't your typical imposing hilltop castle. This is a castle integrated into a natural cave system, a strategic marvel that made it nearly impenetrable for centuries. Its history is fascinating, but today, we're particularly interested in one of its most famous residents, Erezem Luga. Erezem, often referred to as the Knight-Errant, was a 15th century nobleman, a robber baron, and a figure of considerable local legend. He became something of a symbol of Slovenian defiance against the Habsburg Holy Roman Empire. Now, separating historical fact from embellished folklore when it comes to Erezem is, well, it's a bit like trying to catch smoke with your bare hands. But the legends are where things get interesting for our purposes. Erezem's story is one of rebellion. He famously defied Emperor Frederick III after a dispute over the murder of a Habsburg commander. This act essentially declared him an outlaw, and the emperor sent forces to lay siege to Prejama Castle. Now, the castle's unique location made a direct assault incredibly difficult. The imperial forces settled in for a long siege, confident that starvation would eventually force Erezem to surrender. This is where the legends begin to deepen. The tales say that Erasm, far from being starved into submission, was secretly receiving supplies through a hidden passageway leading out the back of the cave system. This passage, which does exist, allowed him to receive fresh food, water, and even, well, some stories say he even taunted the besiegers by throwing roasted oxen down the castle walls. This hidden passage isn't just a strategic advantage, but lends an air of mystery that fits our occult theme. But here's where things get spicier. Some local folklore suggests that Erasm wasn't just relying on a simple supply route. Some whispers claim he also practiced certain esoteric arts, using his knowledge of the land, the caves, and perhaps something more, to aid in his defiance. Think about it, the caves themselves. Caves have always been associated with the hidden, the unknown, the realm of spirits and the underworld. Prehistoric cave paintings are testament to our ancestors' belief that these are places where the veil is thin. Prajama's cave system is extensive, a labyrinthine network of tunnels and chambers hidden deep within the earth. Is it possible that Erasm, or perhaps those who lived in and around Prajama before him, understood the power of these spaces? Did they conduct rituals or practices within the caves, perhaps to harness the energy of the earth or commune with, well, with something else? We have no concrete proof, of course, but it's fascinating to consider. Medieval occult practices weren't always about dramatic demon summoning. They often involved a deep understanding of the natural world, of herbs, stones, and the subtle energies that were believed to permeate everything. A castle built directly into a cave system, ruled by a rebellious nobleman who defied an emperor. It's certainly a fertile ground for such practices. Furthermore, consider the strategic advantage the castle provides, not just physically, but symbolically. Castles were often built on sites already considered sacred, places of power that predated Christianity. Was Prajama built on such a site? Did Erasm choose this location not just for its defensive capabilities, but also for its inherent resonance? It's something to think about. The very act of carving a castle into a cave could be seen as a ritual in itself, a way of claiming and controlling a space, of imbuing it with a certain intention. One rather macabre legend involves Erasm's ultimate demise. The tale says that he was betrayed by one of his own men, who signaled to the besiegers when Erasm was, well, let's just say he was in a rather vulnerable position in the castle's outhouse. A cannonball was fired, and Erasm met his end in a most undignified manner. Now again, this is legend, but even this grim tale adds another layer to the castle's mystique. Death, particularly sudden and unexpected death, is often seen as a catalyst for residual energy, for hauntings, for ghosts. Prajama Castle is, unsurprisingly, considered by some to be haunted. Could Erasm's spirit still linger within those stone walls, perhaps still guarding his fortress, perhaps still tied to the land by the very practices he may have engaged in during his lifetime? In conclusion, while we can't definitively say that Erasm Luga was a practicing occultist, Prajama Castle offers a compelling case study for exploring the potential intersection of strategic importance and hidden practices. The castle's unique location, its association with a rebellious figure, the legends surrounding its defense, and even the tales of Erasm's demise, all contribute to a sense of mystery that resonates with the themes we've been exploring. Whether or not Erasm dabbled in the esoteric arts, Prajama Castle remains a place where the veil between the known and the unknown seems thin, a place where the whispers of the past echo through the stone, inviting us to consider the secrets that may still be hidden within its depths. And really, isn't that half the fun? Next time we'll be traveling to... Alright, settle in folks, let's talk about a castle steeped in more blood and eerie whispers than you can shake a stick at Leap Castle in County Offaly, Ireland. It's got a reputation for being one of the most haunted castles in all of Ireland, and believe me, that's saying something. Now, a lot of these haunted castle stories can be, shall we say, embellished over time, but with Leap, the sheer volume of accounts, the consistency of the descriptions, and the unfortunate history of the place, it makes you wonder if there's something truly elsewhere going on there. The story of Leap Castle, like many Irish castles, is tangled up in family rivalries, betrayals, and a whole heap of general unpleasantness. It was originally built in the 15th century by the O'Bannon clan, but it soon fell into the hands of the O'Carroll family, and that's where things start to get a bit messy. See, the O'Carrolls were known for being a pretty ruthless bunch. They were constantly battling other clans, and even within the family, things were far from peaceful. The castle itself became a stage for some truly horrific events. But the heart of Leap Castle's spooky reputation, that's the Bloody Chapel, also sometimes called the Murder Hole. Now, the name alone should give you a clue that things aren't exactly sunshine and roses in this part of the castle. The chapel, you see, was the scene of a particularly gruesome act of fratricide, or brother killing brother. It wasn't just a quick stab in the dark. This was cold-blooded murder committed during a religious service. The story goes that one of the O'Carroll brothers, a priest named Thaddeus, was saying mass for his family. While he was standing at the altar, his own brother burst in and ran him through with a sword. Right there, in front of God and everyone, Thaddeus was murdered. And from that day on, the chapel was said to be cursed. Imagine the scene for a moment. The flickering candlelight, the solemn chanting, the smell of incense, and then utter chaos. The horrifying shriek as the sword finds its mark, the blood staining the altar, and the lingering presence of such a brutal act, forever imprinted on the stones of the chapel, gives you the shivers, doesn't it? But the Bloody Chapel's not the only reason Leap Castle is considered so haunted. During renovations in the early 20th century, workers made a rather disturbing discovery within the chapel walls. They found a secret oubliette, a dungeon or pit, filled with human remains. And I'm not talking about a few scattered bones. This was a lot of people. Some historians estimate that there were enough remains to fill several cartloads. Now, the O'Carrolls were known for inviting guests over for a lovely dinner, and then, if they happened to be rivals or enemies, they would politely shove them through a hidden trapdoor into the oubliette. The victims would then fall onto spikes at the bottom, or simply be left to rot. Charming, isn't it? This oubliette has been nicknamed the oubliette of screams. These weren't quick, clean deaths. These were slow, agonizing ends. And the collective suffering, the terror, the final, desperate screams of all those poor souls. Well, it's no wonder that Leap Castle is said to be crawling with restless spirits. But it's not just the Bloody Chapel and the oubliette that contribute to Leap Castle's haunted status. There are countless other stories of paranormal activity, strange lights, unexplained noises, and cold spots throughout the castle. Some people have reported feeling like they're being watched, or even touched by unseen hands. Perhaps the most infamous spirit associated with Leap Castle is the Elemental. This isn't your typical ghost of a murdered ancestor or a heartbroken lover. This is something else, something darker, more primal. The Elemental is described as a small, hunched-over creature with a decaying face and black, soulless eyes. Some say it's the embodiment of all the evil and suffering that has occurred within the castle walls. Others believe it's a demonic entity that was summoned long ago and has remained trapped there ever since. Whatever it is, the Elemental is said to be incredibly malevolent. People who have encountered it have reported feeling intense feelings of dread, nausea, and even physical pain. It's not something you want to run into on a dark night, believe me. Now, some of you might be thinking, okay, but are there any logical explanations for all this supposed paranormal activity? And that's a fair question. After all, old castles are drafty, creaky places. The wind can play tricks on your ears, and shadows can play tricks on your eyes. And sure, some of the sightings could be explained by things like faulty wiring or overactive imaginations. But it's hard to dismiss all of the stories surrounding Leap Castle. The sheer number of witnesses, the consistency of the descriptions, and the undeniable history of violence and death. It all adds up to something that's hard to ignore. Leap Castle isn't just a tourist attraction or a spooky story. It's a place where the veil between worlds seems to be particularly thin, a place where the echoes of the past are still very much alive, and a place that serves as a chilling reminder of the darkness that can lurk within the human heart. So if you ever find yourself in County Offaly, Ireland, and you're feeling brave or perhaps foolish, you might consider paying a visit to Leap Castle. Just be warned, you might not be alone, and you might not come back the same. Sleep tight, you've been warned. So we've journeyed through the towering castles and whispered secrets of the medieval world, exploring the occult practices that historians and researchers suggest may have taken place within their stone walls. But what happened after the medieval period? Did these esoteric traditions simply vanish with the Renaissance, or did they leave a lasting mark on the world that followed? Well, the answer, as with most things occult, is a bit more nuanced and fascinating than a simple yes or no. Medieval occultism didn't disappear. It metamorphosed,